Let's move on to my next guest. Joining me now is our U.S. Report regular, former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, happy Thanksgiving and thanks for joining us tonight. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Biden is getting bruised in the polls at the moment. His approval rating is at the lowest level of his presidency. It seems his response to the Middle East is having an impact negatively on that. We have talked about this before. Can you take us through the latest in how Biden is tracking? And if there's any signs, as I think, that there's going to be movement within the Democrats on the question of whether he remains the nominee?
Yeah, a bunch of different questions, James. Let me take the last question first about movement amongst the Democrats to replace Biden. I think they're to the point now where they would really, really like to do that. They just don't know how to do it. It's almost too late to do it with a traditional primary. So if Joe Biden announced tomorrow that he wasn't going to run for re-election, it wouldn't be possible for enough Democrats to get on the early ballots in the early primary states. So it's almost as if the Democrats are stuck with Joe Biden at least until summertime, because that's when the Democrat National Convention takes place, and that's when Joe Biden would become the official nominee. After that happens, then if he steps down, it would be up to the party leadership to replace him. So it's a very, very complex situation that they're facing. They want to replace him. I think there's a lot more public chatter, even in some of the left-leaning press here, about replacing Biden. So you know that it's being discussed heavily. They just haven't figured out a way to do it. Why is he struggling? He's struggling for a variety of reasons. If you talked about inflation, is still a big deal here. The situation in Gaza has really hurt him in a couple of different ways. The people that like what he's doing, for example, myself, who've appreciated his pro-Israeli stance, are never going to vote for him anyway. And the people that support him, who are pro-Gaza and anti-Israel, are very upset that he's taking a pro-Israel standpoint. So they're threatening to not vote for him. So he's almost getting it from both ends. He's not gaining any friends, but he's losing some friends that he has. You put that together with everything else, his age, his abilities, and so forth, it's been a real rough 6 months for Joe Biden, and it doesn't look to be getting any better anytime soon.
Yeah, and Mick, is this an exception to the rule where foreign policy does not wind up moving polls? Because it seems to me that what's happening in the Middle East right now has exposed a deep division in the Democrats, the same sort of division we have, by the way, in the Australian Labor Party here, over this issue of Israel. You know, you've got the Squad and far-left voters, and especially younger voters, being very pro-Palestinian. Yet we've seen people like John Fetterman really surprisingly and coming out and being very pro-Israeli. Does that split hurt Biden? And more crucially, does it deliver anything to the Republicans, or is it just staying on that side?
It absolutely hurts Biden. You're seeing it all over the world. There was an anti-Semitic a rally against anti-Semitism in France, and the far left party refused to participate. So, look, left-leaning parties worldwide are trying to come to terms with the fact that they apparently have a fairly substantial anti-Semitic wing in the party. The Democrats here don't know how to deal with that. You're right. Typically, foreign policy doesn't move the needle for us at a presidential election, and it probably won't writ large here in this election. But keep in mind, we elect presidents state by state, not nationally. There are two states where Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans, play a fairly significant role. That's Michigan and Minnesota, which are two states that, well, one that Donald Trump won in 2016, that's Michigan, and they've both been very close in 2020, and they expected to be close again in 2024. So while the needle doesn't move nationally, it may move locally, and it may change the outcome of a national election by changing a state or two. So foreign policy, typically not a big deal here, but in this particular circumstance, with certain subgroups, with certain voting populations, it absolutely is moving the needle, and it's not moving it for Joe Biden at all.
Well, so this is a really interesting thing, though, because, you know, it is state by state in the U.S., but it's also not compulsory to vote here, there in the United States, as it is here in Australia. So if you've got Trump, who is seen as generally, pro-Israel, and the Republicans are seen, I think, generally as pro-Israel, if you've got a president who's also seen as pro-Israel, those pro-Palestinian voters, they may just stay home, right?
Yeah, and that's what the Democrats are really frightened about. It's very difficult to get people in elections here to switch from Republican to Democrat or vice versa. The way people protest when they don't like their party's candidates is they don't vote. That can have a trickle-down effect, sort of a negative coattails effect. Everybody who doesn't go, every left-leaning, progressive, Palestinian-leaning voter in Detroit who doesn't go to vote for Joe Biden is also not voting for governor or senator or member of Congress or even mayor or dog catcher, for goodness sakes. So yes, it can have a very substantial down ballot impact. And that is another reason the Democrats are worried, not just about losing the presidency, but having a knock-on effect that really affects them both in their efforts to try and regain control of the House and keep control of the Senate.
And meanwhile, let's go over to the other side here. Donald Trump has stirred the pot a bit this week on Joe Biden's 81st birthday. He released a report from his own doctor saying that the former president, Donald Trump, was in excellent mental and physical health. Does this foreshadow a broader Trump campaign that's going to really go hard on Joe Biden's physical and mental fitness?
Sure. And I was laughing because you said that Donald Trump was stirring the pot. There's something he's never done before.
Oh, I know, right? Yeah.
Look, say what you want to about Donald Trump, and you and I have had very, I think, candid conversations, both what he does well and what he does not do well. His health is really not an issue. The man is in tremendous shape. I don't understand how it happens. He doesn't exercise. His diet is terrible, but he's got a constitution that is hard to argue with. He's much younger than his age, whereas Joe Biden is apparently much older than his age. Can that change? Sure it can. As you approach your late 70s, early 80s, we've all seen members of our own family who we thought were going to do fine and sort of have a quick decline. There's no indication yet that's happening with Trump yet. It could, but it hasn't yet. So look, I absolutely expect whoever the Republican is, and it's likely to be Donald Trump, to make an issue of Joe Biden's age, because it's one of the things that Biden can't change. You can change your policies on taxes and inflation and spending and Gaza. You can't change your policy on your own age.
Now, Mick, finally, before I let you go, I want to get into this really fascinating story out of South Carolina, where Charleston, beautiful city Charleston, has elected its first Republican mayor since Reconstruction. His name is William Cogswell. Tell us about this, and is it too soon to read something bigger about Republican trends in this historic win?
Not really. In fact, I think it's really interesting you mentioned this. When your producer sent me this story, I'm so glad someone's talking about it, because this could be really interesting. Charleston is not a first-level city. It's not a second-level city. It's a city, it's probably about 1 million people, but it's growing very, very quickly. There's a lot of folks moving in from the Northeast. Boeing makes airplanes there. Volvo makes SUVs there. It's a growing city. Now, ordinarily, when these folks move from the northern part of our country to the southern part, they bring their liberal politics with them. The North is more typically liberal. The South is more typically conservative. That didn't happen in this election. This is the first Republican in more than 100 years, and it's against the backdrop of what's happening in other Democrat-controlled cities. The folks in Charleston, again, all of politics is local. You know it, I know it. That's absolutely axiomatically true. But you have to imagine there was something happening in the background here where people said, look, we don't want Charleston to become Chicago. We don't want Charleston to become Washington, D.C. We certainly don't want Charleston to become San Francisco, California. And with that being a winning message, it may sort of send a message to other Republican candidates going into 2024 that here's a formula that you can run on in big cities in the United States and win. So you should expect to see a lot more coverage of this and a lot more talking about crime and local politics as the Republicans move forward.
Mick Mulvaney, thanks so much. I think you're absolutely right. Some of those Democrat cities like San Fran and Washington, D.C. are the best campaign ads the Republicans have. Thank you so much for joining us.